Welcome. Welcome to the Impact of Our Beliefs, Part 3. I want you to know how really thrilled I am to have you here with me tonight. This series of discussions has been an incredible experience for me, as well as so many of you that I've heard from. Thank you, first of all, for taking the time to let me know how much that it's impacted you, to let me know how much that it has expanded your concepts of your own beliefs and opened your heart and your mind to those of others as well. As I've told you in the past, I believe that this is just such an incredible opportunity for all of us. The discussion of our beliefs is something I believe is actually imperative to the creation of peace. Peace only is a part of us when we are not only at peace within ourselves, but of course extend that opportunity to others. So our question for tonight is, how can we more closely connect with others of different communities, different faiths, different beliefs? And how can we impact the world so that everything that we do is focused on the greater good for all? So before we get into that question, I'd like to recap our last, actually 3 discussions. One that, of course, followed the trailer of Belief, which we're very excited is approaching its premiere launch on October 18th. And the other that followed after that, and this is our 3rd time together. So our discussion is getting actually quite more detailed, but I'd like to recap for anyone who hasn't had an opportunity to review the other videos, and this way you can come right on board and jump in. All right. So we first began the first discussion following the trailers, talking basically about beliefs themselves. And what are the impacts of beliefs? How do we start to search for the commonalities rather than the parts that divide us? We also discussed whether or not that division that we see through different belief systems and or spiritual traditions, is that a positive thing or a negative thing? I shared with you my belief that it actually was a very natural thing, because different beliefs are created based upon many components, but always on what is prevalent energetically at the time. So in a society, in a culture, in a family, in traditions, in religions, in education, in media, there are so many influences. The other part is that we started to discuss actually searching for the commonalities and what would be some of the reasons why we would do that or not do that. And I invite you, of course, to watch the videos to bring yourself up to speed on those discussions. Our first discussion then coming together as part of this series was in looking at the impact of beliefs on purpose. So we looked at, first of all, what is a belief? What is faith? Are they the same or are they different? One of the things that we shared was that the belief is actually an accumulation of programming from all of the influences that I described just a moment ago. But it's sort of the culmination of everything that a person has decided is true for them. And very often it is connected to certain traditions and choices that one makes, decisions and actions that they take. Faith, on the other hand, is a bit different. Faith is a belief, and yet it is, rather than something structured on a program, It's something that is based on the connection to something greater than yourself. So it's more esoteric. Belief is a little bit more tangible. We see them played out in traditions, ritual, and as I said, decisions and actions that are taken. Faith, however, is this reaching out, even outside sometimes of the belief system, for something more, always connecting to something even greater. The other thing that we talked about was this effect of belief on purpose. And one of the things that became so clear in our discussion was that purpose, which everyone seems to strive for, is most often found when we have created the opportunity or the path for giving of ourselves, the giving, the sharing of our gifts, our ideas. In other words, the sharing that comes only from that heart space of our authentic selves, the truest part of our being. And so purpose is also closely associated with fulfillment. And when we began to look at beliefs and how it's associated with purpose, one of the things that we discovered was that our belief system very often is created within us in order to assist us in getting to that place where we are fully in purpose. One of the things that we'll be discussing next session on the 14th is how to determine actually whether or not your beliefs are in alignment with your purpose. Are they opening all of those pathways, or are they closing them down? So tonight's question is also sort of a continuation of the question that we put out last week. That question was, how can we get closer to each other? How can we learn more about each other's beliefs? How can we understand each other more? How can we create more communication? How can we actually be there? Not from a place of just tolerance, but a place of celebration. And we talked about different life experiences and how they affect us. And in fact, I shared with you the experience that I had with my own mother, and how when I was a young student graduate nurse, I also had been ordained as a spiritualist minister, and the practices within that tradition, which were hands-on healing, training in mediumship and in channeling, my mother saw as the work of the devil. And unfortunately, she passed away just 2 years after that, and never really had the opportunity to open herself so that she could actually see all of the benefits that the two worlds that merged within me and my work, being conventional medicine and very non-conventional medicine, created this incredible offering in my work of a very deep level of healing for those that I worked with. In addition, I had been blessed with the opportunity to create many programs for hospitals and hospice of Long Island. I worked with head injury patients as well. And it was all this integration of beliefs, actually, about healing. And so I used my mother as an example because her belief was so based on fear that she wasn't able to put that aside enough to see what was really happening. And today, as we know, integrative medicine and healing programs are alive and well all around the world, and has become not only commonplace, but has become sought after in many medical institutions and all sorts of healing opportunities around the world. So that fear and how it closed her off is the same fear that often we see within ourselves when we do not open our hearts and minds to others' belief systems. What happens is that we begin to withdraw and separate from others in that fear. Well, that separation is also what keeps us very small, because our fulfillment and our purpose comes from moving forward and becoming a more expansive version of ourselves. So what that means is that we need to change. We need to move forward and understand more about the world, more about ourselves, and more about each other in order to be of service to each other. And that we did establish is really part of purpose, if not all of purpose. And even though that may manifest differently in each of us, we are here in service to each other. When we begin to understand the oneness that we share and really what that means and what it requires of us, we can start to perhaps ease some of those constrictions or parameters that we've put on our own belief systems. I asked the question last week, why would we want to do that? Well, for one of the reasons was just as I described, but also when we accept others and we accept ourselves for who we are, it is an opportunity to create peace. And the one thing that I know is that peace is something that we all strive for. We all want to be living in a peaceful community. There is something that happens to the spirit when we come to that place of peace. And it's a sense of freedom and joy. And I believe a full expression then of who we really are. We also discussed what are the reasons perhaps that we wouldn't want to learn about others' belief systems or traditions or religious beliefs. And I think one of the most prevalent reasons is simply because we are bombarded with so much fearful information, specifically from the media and from the others around us, that it's the fear energy that has become so prevalent that we just automatically are fearful of anything that is different or we see as unusual. There is nothing further from the truth in terms of our own growth and development. Because the moment that we keep ourselves separate, we actually are keeping ourselves separate from our authentic self, who we really are, because the fear does nothing but compress us. And so when we are out and about in this world and looking for these opportunities to come into purpose and to become this fuller, more expressive expansion of ourselves, the only way to do that is to begin to welcome others in. I also think that very often we may keep others at bay because it justifies behavior, because it justifies our judgment, our anger, our belief that we have the right to strike out. And that heart set can do nothing but create more and more separation and more of those energies that are so defiant when it comes to being that full expression of love. So as we look at all of these aspects of life and what we are doing here and how our belief systems impact everything that we do, we begin to realize that this is really a responsibility of ours more than anything else. And in fact, you may even say it's an obligation, because ultimately we are the ones who actually pay for not opening our hearts and our minds to others, because we never get to experience everything that's waiting for us when we do so. So the question for tonight, how can we go further to learn more about others' beliefs? What are some of the things that we can do individually? And what are some of the things that we can do as a community? So I wanted to share another part of my story with you. My grandmother, as opposed to my mother, was a very open heart and a very open-minded woman. And I was very blessed by that attitude that she had. My grandmother took me to my first gospel meeting. She took me to my first revival. She took me to my first Pentecostal religious ceremony. In other words, my grandmother had this open heart and open mind that led her into experiences where she entered in without any fear whatsoever. And in fact, she entered in with excitement. And she would laugh and laugh and laugh, and she would say, "This world is so huge. Why would we ever just keep ourselves to just one way of doing things?" And I'm very happy to say that I think that I adopted a lot of her behaviors and her attitude. And I'm very grateful also because she often took me with her on her adventures. There were many around her who would shake their heads and sometimes even shake their fingers and tell her that she was dancing with the devil. Tell her that, you know, she was playing with fire and that one of these days that all of that would backfire on her. Well, it never did. My grandmother, till the day that she died, was as happy and as fulfilled and content and peaceful as I could ever imagine another human being. And I believe it was because of her willingness to openly embrace others, but also her desire to know about them, her desire to actually explore them. Last discussion, I also told you about my experience living in Thailand and how much the deeply spiritual people there enriched my life. I watched as they entered every business, every store, every shopping mall, their homes, and would bow in reverence to the spirit house or the shrine that they had on the outside, filled with the images of their ancestors and animals and all the evidence of nature that they could collect and put inside of it. This was done many times during the day, as you can imagine. And I was always in such awe at how devoted they were, how committed they were to this practice of connecting to this spirit that they saw as greater than themselves, and asking for those spirits to guide them and to be part of whatever it was that they were doing. They were also so diligent in making certain that whatever flowers or any parts of nature, or even their little sweets that they would put inside, were always kept fresh. The devotion is what moved me so. And in fact, when I came back to the States, I incorporated that practice of beginning my business and ending my business hours with that same sort of devoted tradition. And it was simply just honoring those who had come before me, honoring all of my guides, my mentors, my healers, my teachers, everyone, in spirit and out of spirit, in physical form, who I know are here to support me. What this does is it gives us a greater sense of connectedness to all that is. And so as we begin to explore other religious traditions, spiritual traditions, what happens is we are given the opportunity to enrich ourselves. And it doesn't mean that we are in a position where we have to choose one over the other, but rather we have the opportunity to pick and choose whatever speaks to our hearts. And without knowing what some of those may be, we could be missing out on something that could open the floodgates to our purpose coming forward and actually having the experience of such fulfillment. And of course, peace. So, what are some of the things that we can do? Well, you certainly can, as my grandmother did. Pull over to the side of the road if you see a revival going on, and walk inside the tent, see what's going on. I know where I am here in Colorado, we don't see too many of those, but there may be some in your area. And if there aren't, there are other things, I know for sure, that are going on that will enrich you. If you can just bring yourself to think outside of the box, to allow outside of the box all that is there at your fingertips. You can read more, you can travel more, you can discuss more. In fact, it brings up a question for me: why don't we discuss our beliefs more? Why has it become such a taboo for us to discuss our beliefs with each other? Again, we come back to that same place where fear has this dominance over us, and it creates this very small and confined world that we then work and try so hard to fit within, when that's just not our nature. And it's why it never feels quite right. There are other religious institutions that you can go to, that you can walk in and be part of the service or part of a discussion. There are also opportunities to just speak to someone that you meet in a coffee shop. There are no rules. There are no regulations against this. It's only those that we impose upon ourselves that keep us separate from each other. There is meaning to all of this. The meaning is that we are already connected, and that the manifestation of our spiritual journey, our spiritual growth, is one that it demands change. It demands that we grow. It demands that we expand. It demands that we go beyond where we began as a child, thinking as a child, but as an adult, starting to think as an adult, but a fearless adult, an adult that can learn to put aside judgment and conditions and expectations, and instead can welcome in those differences without fear. This is the opportunity that we are being given. As you know, this series of discussions that we've had is in preparation for the premiering of Oprah's Belief documentary series that begins on October 18th. Watching that, you will see religious traditions from all around the world that I guarantee you have never seen before. As you view those, I implore you to put aside your judgment of them, to put aside the conditions that you would place upon them, and to put aside the judgment and the conditions that you place upon yourself, and begin to ask yourselves the question, well, what if? What if there is something in that for me? And what if I have a belief? What if I have a tradition that could serve another? The moment that we start thinking about serving another, we have stepped into our purpose. How that manifests may change, but the purpose remains the same. We are here to be of service to each other. But how is it possible if we don't know each other and we don't know about each other? If we don't know the language that will transcend all cultures, that language is the language of love. And it's one that interpretation of it is really not necessary. And instead, if we just allow it to be channeled through us, because at the end of the day, that's really all it's asking of us, that we simply allow it to love through us. And so as we begin to open our hearts and open our minds and open our arms to each other, as we step into that purpose of being in service, we are also in service to that love and the beginnings of that peace that goes beyond all understanding. And so in a moment, I'm going to open it up for questions or comments, anything that you would like to share. But I have two things. Number one, last week I invited you to write any stories that you might have that you might want to share about how your beliefs have changed and the effects of those changes on your life. Or perhaps beliefs that you haven't changed and how your devotion and your commitment to them has enriched your lives. I also want to review what we're going to discuss in our next session, which is on the 14th. We're going to look in more detail at the mechanisms of belief, how they are really formed. We're also going to discuss how to look at a belief and determine if it is working for us or against us. In other words, is it taking us closer to our ability to fully be in purpose, to be in service, and to allow love to just love through us? Or is it keeping us small and separate? Is it keeping us fearful? Is it preventing us from expanding or extending beyond where we are in this moment? If it is keeping us fearful, what would be the steps that we could take to venture out of that fear and to do so fearlessly? What could we do to soften our hearts or soften our minds and ask ourselves that question, well, what if? And we can explore why we would want to do that. We can explore why it feels so good when we are in the flow of that energy, and how we can do so. How can we create these changes without fear? And understand that change is what we are here for. We all want change, often are fearful of it. But when we look out into the world, each of us has a laundry list of all the things that we would like to see changed. But in order for those changes to take place, we have to first become the change that we want to see. And I believe that we can do this together. I believe that if I can embrace you as you are, without expectation of you changing simply to appease me or make me feel more comfortable, that I can celebrate who you are, your traditions, your own journey, and that we can extend that to each other. That not only can we be that change that we want to see, but that the world will follow suit. But it all begins right here within each and every one of us. So that's what we're going to discuss next time. And so for today, I'd like to hear some of your ideas, some of your thoughts about how we can connect with each other more. How can we learn more about each other? And when we do, how can we learn to embrace each other? What can we do to create the foundation for a more integrated belief system that's built on mutual respect, that's built on this love and peace beyond all understanding, and this system that is within each and every one of us that connects us to each other. So I'm going to open it up for questions, comments, anything that you would like to share. And again, if you have anything, please feel free. If you would like to email me, my email is Marcy, M-A-R-C-Y, at heartshiftcoach.com. And I look forward to your comments, your questions. I also look forward to receiving your stories. I know that you have gone through changes in your life. I know that the challenges that you have had in your lives have created tremendous change within you. And so this is an opportunity for you to reflect. When I look back at where I began in my spiritual journey, in my belief system, and even though as a young woman, I had already made quite a shift, going from this very staunch Lutheran background into a very deep metaphysical understanding of the universe and spirituality and healing. Where I have come even from there is so far beyond what I could have ever I don't know, expected. It's beyond anything I could have ever even understood existed. My journey has been so interesting. It has taken me through the dogma of Lutheran into the metaphysical world, into the world of the spiritualist, into Judaism, into Buddhism, into Hinduism, into so many different traditions. And each one has given me a part of myself that is here today and has brought me to a place of understanding that I could have never known, as I said, even existed. So one of the questions that has come up is, why is it important to look at where we are? Why not just look at what's ahead or look at others and decide if it fits us or not? So my answer to that is this. When we are reflective and we look at the parts of ourselves that have been governing our thoughts, the choices that we make, the actions that we take, and the experiences that are created from those, when we reflect upon that, it becomes very clear to us whether or not we want to make a diversion, whether or not we want to go on a new path. And it also allows that energetically to open up for us. And so when we take that opportunity to reflect, to really think, and to really explore who we are and what our belief is, we can ask that question. Does it serve me? Does it serve those around me? Does it serve the greater good? And does it serve the future of generations to come? Remember, we are not here by ourselves. We are generation after generation after generation. Those before us, those after us. And everything that we do serves purpose in some way. You are feeding one energy or another. And as we have been told, you cannot serve two masters. If you say you are serving peace and you are serving love, then you cannot serve fear, because peace and that extension and expansion of love cannot happen from that energy frequency of fear. And so we are constantly being asked to make a decision. Which force field, which field of energy do we want to serve? When we make that choice, we then can feed it. We can feed that field of energy and start to see the world that we want to live in, and we want the generations that come behind us to be able to live in peace and harmony, in happiness and in health, and of course, also be in service to themselves, to each other, to the world, and to the greater good of all. So, without any further questions, again, I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules, but also for wanting to be part of this dialogue, because it's the dialogue that helps to create the change. We are filled with this intention of creating a better, happier, healthier world, and a world filled with peace, and a world where the spiritual journey of each of us is held in reverence and great respect and regard and celebrated, because we truly are one. In the moment that we allow that to be alive and well within us, that connectedness, that oneness is what feeds us with everything that we need. And so until next time, which is on the 14th, I'm sending you my blessings of such great love and exploration and many questions of what if, and this intention. It is my intention to hold this space for you, to see myself and to see you and to see all of those faces around the world filled with the light and the love that we are. And so until next time, these blessings are yours. And again, I thank you. Good night.